update. We have some good staffing news. We have some ability to add staff for next year. I'm still a little dizzy from the good news. Everything will be finalized Friday, and then we'll announce all the stuff on Monday. But the areas that really need it, the mathematical data-driven decisions, are going to get some extra teachers, which is wonderful. And we're really excited about it. So thanks for everyone who's helped out with alpha testing. Kate, it's been going great. Danielle Huntley, thank you for your organization. And Kate and everyone else who's been helping. Alpha testing has been really a good experience for students. They've been rocking it out. So without further ado, let's get started. One more clap. One welcome for Dow. Thank you.
Always appreciate the energy. Hey, good afternoon, team. How y'all doing? Okay. Awesome. Hey, team, so thank you for having me. If I stay over here, can I take off my mask?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
You're a doctor with everyone.
Democracy at the end of the day, right? Hey, team, so happy 2022. I hope the year has been treating you well so far. The military called me away for 3 weeks, which I enjoyed, because DMPS and yeah. So, hey, I appreciate your time this afternoon. I kind of created or curated content, but I think most of it will be driven by the interaction amongst each other, which is what I hope like the biggest part of it is. So as we go through, I ask you please, again, just a reminder, reflect on how can you share your humanity with people next to you, and then also how can you open yourself to their humanity, right? Keep it in mind that we're more than, right? So all of you are more than teachers, just like I'm more than a DMPS employee. Should probably send a memo to some of the folks in the district so they remember that. But yeah, here we go. Also, happy Black History Month to all of y'all. Yep. Black History Month. So when I was in Kuwait, when I was deployed, we based out of Kuwait, and we had an opportunity for the TSC, for the whole base, to do a Black History Month event. One of the things that keep coming back to me is, despite slavery, despite Jim Crow, all of those things, the Black national anthem for Black folk in America is Lift Every Voice. And that's a profound thing for me, because when we talk about equity, right, it's very hard to say you want equity if you cause harm, right? So it calls on us to sometimes eat the crow, right, because we don't want to cause more harm. We want healing. And so in that spirit, I hope also today you do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And also I find space that allows you to heal. So if you need to do what you need to do, feel free to. This, I'm hoping as a community today, guide us, acknowledging that in our history, the isms are part of reality, but we face them front and center. We don't shy away from it. That also goes with power, right? Because isms and inequities thrive on power. And so how can we push in our small and individually as well as group? Also speaking your truth, right? That could not go without saying. That's one of the biggest things. But what does it really mean to speak your truth? I'll let you decide that. For me, it's also not tone policing others, right? Because I cannot speak my truth and tone police somebody else. Somebody else's truth and mine are tied together because of interdependence. So I ask you to please think about that as well. Extend care to yourself. Expect and accept non-closure, because this is human work. And like last time in the fall when we were here, it's a big thing where hopefully you wrestle with some of the things, and non-closure is just a fact of life, because we're human when it's all said and done. Impact versus intent, right? Never ever resting at the intent, because almost everyone has good intent. But the question is, does our impact match that? And if it doesn't, what are we doing to actively engage? And then lastly, assuming everyone is doing their best. So again, our objectives, in particular, this one on the left, co-creating a necessary space with colleagues to co-learn, right, about emotions, equity, and social emotional learning. My job is to facilitate, but really the learning is with y'all. You have a lot more knowledge about life, education, but also your school than I do. With that said, a lot of you probably watched this video before. This is our welcome inclusion, but this is a key activity for us. If you watched it before, think of it through the critical lens of, okay, thank you, of yourself. Single stories that you have about yourself, single stories others have about you. So at Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, a lot of you probably watched it before, but this three-minute clip, I want you to think about yourself. Think about your identity. Think about your roles that you occupy, especially identity markers that are most significant to you, right? And through that lens, what single stories do you have about yourself? What single stories do others have about you, right? So please wrestle with that as you watch this video.
From a conventional middle-class Nigerian family, my father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. That poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I will say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country. The most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about the charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family.
So, one of the key things that always resonates with me as she's speaking is we all have single stories, right? Because stereotypes are a big thing. But she says the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue necessarily, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. As you sit here today, When you think about your family, your friends, your coworkers, this school, I'm pretty sure people have similar stories about you, right? And you probably have similar stories about yourself. So I ask you if you can turn to your neighbors and you can answer, what is one single story that stands out to you or that you're cognizant of a lot, right? And then perhaps how can you transform that single story? Okay? So I'll give us a couple minutes here. Just turn to your neighbor. And if you don't have a neighbor, you can do it in threes, or I can come around you. Thank you.
Definitely need to be honest and I get the impression that other people think my hobby are okay because I'm can't live here. So they don't understand the way I do things. So I am honest, and you're so when you feel all those things, they don't see that. They see you as the person that walks around with pain what are my
that's kind of the work about it. And I didn't support it. What's happening because I'm saying they work, not in the area, right? Not in the so it's really interesting that there's a flash of like thought. Yes, went to bigger high school, right? What small towns, right? Like, see it, right? Good. It's not, I don't know. Nobody gets it, right? Like, I know it's a small town. What she's done, it's hard. Like, my understanding, right? Wait, what's the like the words that I see for the Jews have the same exact when they have that's my struggle, right? I feel like you're looking at
Hey team,
right? Like, I wasn't
can we come back together, please?
I think I don't know if that's what this is, so that's kind of
Thank you. I had a great conversation with Miss April back there. So I hope you all had as well. Does anyone have anything they hope to share with the rest of the group or feel inspired to share? Something that came up in your conversation? Yes.
I just want to say it's never seen hurtful video.
Yep. Yep. Agreed. Co-sign that. Yep. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Dina and I talked about the story associated when you tell people that we work at North High School or like APMBS. And I used to work a different second job when I started teaching. And I said, like, I just got like a teaching job. And the customers would be like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. And they'd ask where I work. And I said, like, North High School. And they're like, oh, sorry. What lady said, oh, sorry. I was like, sorry? Like, for what? I love it. And I'm having a good time. But there's like this mentality where schools can.
Yep. And also, how about subjects, right?
Yeah.
Right? History, math, English, right? They're single stories all the time. Yes.
I do a lot of this kind of stuff with students in the course of teaching.
Yep.
And one interesting aspect was students assumed I had married into my last name because of the way I look.
Yep.
Rather than that being the name that I was born with.
Yep.
So that was an interesting thing for our discussion.
Yep. And so we can keep going, but there's two things I really want to get at here. Number one is when those single stories are unchecked, they become problematic because they manifest themselves in so many other areas, especially the single stories we have about ourselves. So one single story I used to have was, because I was born in Africa, I'm African, I know African history. When I went to Penn, right, some of the smartest kids in the world, I was having a conversation with a Nigerian classmate. He destroyed me. The next day I went to the counselor and I said, I'm majoring or minoring in African studies, right? Because I needed to understand. My point there is that the single stories, sometimes we're unconscious of them because they're connected to the stereotypes that we could consume or see and witness. And so we have to intentionally challenge those, because if we don't, they manifest in other areas. Second thing is this, single things like apology. So I've been very big with my colleagues at the district level, especially the C3s, not to apologize. Because if you're late for 2 minutes and you apologize, your apology is not welcome. Life is just life. 2 minutes, it's okay, let's keep it moving, right? Or you say something the wrong way, or you didn't articulate it the right way, or you feel an emotion and you apologize. Do not do that. Because guess what? Other people take that, not from your lens, but through their own lens. So you apologizing, especially with people who play with higher dynamics, guess what? That's a weakness. And they're going to exploit that. Also, that leads to other things that we're telling, stories we're telling ourselves. You're worthy of being 2 minutes late. You're worthy of not getting it right the first time. That's okay. Necessary space, right? We don't have to be perfect. So, some of you probably, how many people have seen the mood meter or used it in a classroom before, right? Some folks. So, I want to ask you, how are you feeling right now, right? And we could probably sit here with like some of the deep feelings we have. However, I want you to think about how are you feeling this moment, and pick a word out there, right? Then I'm gonna ask you another question. Just pick a word that closely defines how you're feeling right now. I can share these with your principal, so you can shoot them out the slides. So, okay, how are you feeling about your year so far? Okay. Okay. How are you feeling about your life? Okay. Now, I want to have a group discussion if it's okay. How many people had different emotions for any of those questions I asked? Right? So, what are your thoughts? What do you think? What do you think about that? Yes.
All three questions were in different quadrants.
Can you tell me more, please?
Yeah, the one, how I feel inspired. Yeah, that was where I felt. Let's see, how do I feel about this year? I wrote between proud and optimistic.
Yep.
And then about my life in general, I think I did concern.
Yep. Thank you. Anyone else?
Second, sure.
Yes.
I think that it's really easy when you hear those three words to pick three different words, right? Those settings.
Mm-hmm.
But we all know in reality they all mold together, right? So it's really hard sometimes to separate how you feel at work from how you feel at home, unless you're really great at turning off that switch. Which as educators we know we're not, right? We take home the feelings of the day, the feelings of our kids, and then that plays into the words we might pick or choose.
Awesome. So maybe you read my head. So you're getting ahead to where I was getting at. So most of the time we're dealing with multiple emotions at the same time. It just so happens that one emotion is the biggest one in the moment, right? So at work, it may be the emotions that you're feeling that moment. At home, maybe you have a young child, you may feel inspirational or something, right? It's a different disposition. The point is, though, it's very easy for emotion contagion to happen. We talked about that the last time, right? It's very easy for you had a bad day for that to sip into the home, right? Or you had a bad day at home and the next morning you had a bad day at work, right? Or somebody else's negative emotion feeds into you. Or in a year like we've had, you may have something positive, but the environment you're in is so negative that you're afraid of sharing that, right? In the past, it was the opposite, positive, toxic positivity, right? The point is, though, is we need to know how we're feeling, be able to define and name them, because then we can deal with it. Research is finding that naming it is the first step to being able to deal with it. Because emotions, like last time we talked about it a little bit, sometimes think of it like extreme. What emotion is this guy feeling? Right? Somebody say crazy, but that's not an emotion. But that's the reality. How about this young lady? Right? Somebody say that's Iowa nice. I'll call it the international peace sign, right? But every day when we're interacting with people or when we're in spaces, we're picking up, our brain is picking up without us being conscious. And so us naming emotions is critical because if we don't, this happens to us without even being conscious of it, right? Emotional damage, right? And sometimes we think of it a negative way, but if we're not careful with our emotions, the single stories start holding true. It's easy to capitulate to that. Or burnout, depersonalizing, right? That's one of the signs. It's easy to just keep it moving, right? Again, this is why it's so important that we deal so we don't have to deal with that emotional damage. I want to give us some time here to reflect on this. So these are the 5 emotional intelligence skills. They're articulated well with the ruler. Mark Brackett created this couple other people at Yale. So these, starting with the orange, right? Recognizing emotions, a ruler, recognize emotions, understand, label, express, and then regulate, right? Those are being the skills of emotional intelligence, right? What I ask of you though is when you look at this in specific skills, these are not the competencies, but these skills, which one of these are strength areas you do really well, right? And when do you thrive in that environment? So let's say mine is regulating my emotions. When do I thrive really well? Well, I thrive well in being able to regulate my emotions when I have somebody I know near me. Or if I'm in a meeting and I know somebody in a space, I'm able to regulate my emotions a little bit better. But if I don't, there might be other things said, right? So I ask you, which one of these are areas of strength, perhaps, and when do you thrive most in that space? Any questions? So if you could please discuss in groups of twos or threes, I'll give us some time here to just talk about it for a second, okay?
I think and I think I'm
That's probably my important. Not necessarily myself, but other people, right? Like, I have a hard time saying if they're mad at me or if they're just mad. Right? Yeah. Right. So maybe I can tell what the emotion is, I just don't know. So maybe I'm okay with that. Maybe it's a break that I
Understanding causes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe that's fine to see. But I can't see it.
I think I'm pretty good at expressing
That's important, right? It's important to be able to say, I'm worried about things. I'm sad. Like, I think part of this, I have a hard time doing it. I think part of that is that persona as like, as a kid, right, as a boy, like, you didn't know, like, you're emotional, right? Like, we didn't talk about those things. Although my mom
ways
was
to
really
express
big.
them.
Yeah, my mom was really big. I'm like, you need to express your emotions. It still felt like, well, if you were away at school, were you mad? Or were you like, wasn't this, I'm sad, instead of, like, so maybe that's where, maybe the reason I struggle with is,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's part of a societal issue. That a lot too. In the expressing piece. I Cole and I have talked through, not without too, like my did a handful of emotional abuse stemming from some generations. So when you guys talk about identifying the cause of emotions, like a lot more than taking me a long time. But I do often refer back to like self-compassion, what I mean? Like that's my immediate thing. I have to like talk myself. Like there are other things. Yeah.
I think that's so, especially in our job, like, all the collaboration. Like with the PLCs, where it's, no culture, that, or advocacy, is like, you try to figure it out. Like, okay, I say something stupid. Is it the situation? Is it people don't like the idea, or is it, like, there's a lot of things to, like, sit through that your brain has to, like, try to sort of put them all the time. That, I don't know, it's been a struggle. Like my whole life with that, right? Like, and I'm not to the point where it's like, because that just why are you crying, right? Like, it's to the point where, like, it's blinded, and it's like, it took a second. And sometimes I still don't think, right? Like, that's, and I get my yard all the time, like, yeah, this is what's wrong. I'm telling you. It's like, so I have to try to listen to what people say. But at 12, you never know what's wrong, right? she had to make this. Some boy asked her why she was in school. And then he was like, oh, you go to this school. And so she's like, she said, what's the school? So is that so she's like, yeah, that's like, and my wife said, back. I part of it comes from wanting to go to school, right?
So there's no way for be able to do anything until they come around to be able to label it for themselves so they can move through what they need to move through.
I took a picture of the slide. I'm sure it's gonna share it with you guys. But I think about, I didn't finish all SEL, but how much this team control, all of the and like our kids that their brains aren't fully developed to regulate their emotions, and definitely not to do this gray, right, gray triangle, like they're not like it's not there. So like being really intentional around practicing and then also like how to start translating
So none of it's taught, so they're all cognizant. Maybe they end up with an experience and in actuality, but they don't, they can't do that because they get that age and develop more age.
Yep, when I was talking to a group of our freshmen, at some point, it was fairly early, it was a little while, but talking to them about how like, wisdom,
Like the age gap, when my age, all of these ways, I mean, your neighbors.
Hey team, we'll come back together.
Everybody was teaching.
Thank you.
Parent, neighbor, parent, look like, well,
I think you know what I'm gonna ask. Anyone like to share with the larger group anything that came out from your discussion? No? Just a reminder, right? I think I told you what my boss used to say, right? The first one to share is usually the best looking, the smartest, and the first to get promoted. So, I can put in a good word. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I was just talking about how, like, I didn't really know what my skill was, I guess, but I know that in my classroom, I am able to, like, navigate things better because, like, take today. This morning, first period, pushing my buttons. They knew where to find them, and they were poking them. And when I knew I was at my end, I just looked at the room and said, I gotta take a lap. I stepped out of the room for 30 seconds, breathed, shook it off, walked back in, and I was ready to go again. And I was able to like identify that and take an action. And that's not something I could have done 3-4 years ago, for sure.
Thank you. That's powerful. One of the best examples in one of the elementary schools is exactly that. A young man went into the young man was hot, like really going off with the teacher. So they call the AP. AP comes, asks the young man, what do you want to do? He's like, I want to walk. She said, okay, go. That's it. And then she radioed everyone, when you see him, leave him alone. Right? 10 minutes later, he was good to go. Right? So being able to teach young folks, like, you are human, right? So thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
So I think the gray box is, for me, it hits. When I'm interacting with one of you, if I'm escalated, y'all are going to be escalated right back. And same with the young person. If I'm escalated, they're going to be escalated. It's really hard to not use my single story of being an enormous human to like use that to my advantage, right? Like I can't do that. I gotta be calm, cool, and collected if that's the expectation I'm on the other side.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. And for leaders too, it's very easy for these emotions when you're holding them in. Somebody hear me? Everyone good? Awesome. It's very easy for leaders when you're dealing with emotions, put others first all the time, because you have to release those emotions somehow, especially when it comes to expression. And I'm sure all of you, because you're leading in a classroom, the same way as well. So thank you for sharing. Anyone else? The promotion is still up for grabs. No? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So again, last time we kind of defined transformative SEL, what we're trying to do. If I was to give it to you bottom line up front, right, Bluff, is process of where young people build relationships, respectful, lasting, but co-learning, because you cannot know the stories of the 20, 30 or some more kids in your classroom. It's not possible. So it's important to co-create space with them because they also have something to offer. And so we're not dealing with, I have to know X equals blah. No, it's I'm human, you're human. I want to learn with you so that we can create a space together. You understand I'm here to teach you, but I'm also learning from you, right? What is your humanity? What's your story? How does this resonate with you? So creating those spaces with young people is key. But can somebody read that, please? Anyone?
I'll read it. No one is born racist or anti-racist. These result from the choices we make. Being anti-racist results from a conscious decision to make frequent, consistent, equitable choices daily. These choices require ongoing self-awareness and self-reflection as we move through life. In the absence of making anti-racist choices, we unconsciously unconsciously or consciously, hold up aspects of white supremacy, white dominant culture, and unequal institutions in society. Being racist or anti-racist is not about who you are, it is about what you do.
Thank you. Thoughts?
Love is an action.
Can you say that again, please?
Love is an action.
Yep.
I love you, I need to act in the verb.
Yep. And it's not something just done once, right? Because it's consistent, right? Continuous. Think about our personal relationships. It's not just one-off thing, it's consistent. It's not an episode, it's consistent. Anyone else? Yes.
I don't remember the exact quote, but Maya Angelou, how you make people feel. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Like, I think of that when I look at that.
Yep. So another way of saying that, if correct me, is when people experience you, what do you want them to experience? Right? When people experience you, what do you want them to experience? So this one I've been wrestling a lot with as of late, just to be honest. Because, so my goal this year is to get to 70-something books read. And so as of late, I picked up 3 or 4 books so far that focus on racism or equity. And the common themes that keeps coming up that I'm wrestling with is this dichotomy, the wrestling of hate and love, depersonalization, humanity, and what does it take to see people as human beings all the time? without sacrificing ourselves. And I go back to that national anthem, lift every voice. You cannot, it's not possible to love, right, effectively and hate at the same time, if we're serious about it. It's not possible also for us to label each other, because once we label, guess what we just did? We engage in single stories. Once I label you, that's a single story I have. That's one experience. Perhaps I haven't seen you with your family. Perhaps I haven't seen you with your friends, but I just label, right? So guess I'm no better than you. If you did some harm, I'm no better. So this idea that every single day we have to do better because we have to call people in when harm is done, but we can never forget we cannot discard people. The classical Christian hate, definition of love. Hate the sin, but still try to love the sinner. We cannot be anti-racist if we're not making those choices every day. But it's not just race. It's the single stories we have about class. Maybe it's height, right? Religion, Islamophobia, special education, special needs, ability. It's any of the isms or inequities. It may not be you actively, consciously having that, but guess what? You have been exposed to, your brain has been exposed to TV, society, and so forth in your upbringing. So we have to, in the moment now, doesn't matter. We're here, and we're in the real world. And the reality is, if we put group identity on the individual, then it's about who you are. If I put group identity on you that as an individual, then it's about who you are. If you are white, you're racist. Because white folk were racist before, so all white folk. That's what happens when we put the group identity onto the individual. Is it possible for BIPOC to have anti-blackness? Yes. I've experienced anti-blackness on the continent of Africa. So what we're talking about is that we cannot hide. So when we have a conversation about racism, we cannot capitulate to the emotions that we feel because we're afraid of having that discussion. Because it's not about whether you're a good person or not. That's besides the point. Because when we think about racism, we think of the bigotries. We think of KKK. White supremacy shows up in different ways. White supremacy is me using language of academic colloquial language to label people, which is just as bad. It's making people feel less than because I know something. That's just as bad, right? So I challenge all of us, team, as we go on, it's every day. How are we intentionally choosing humanity? Because if it's humanity, we never rely on the group identity to tell the story. The individual has to tell the story. But even then, the individual is complex because he or she has, or they have intersectional identities. You're more than. But again, single stories, you have to check those. Our emotions, you have to know where we are on the emotion map. Because otherwise we capitulate to those single stories. We have to check our actions every day. And our actions are not based on our intent. It's not on the intent, it's on the impact. So if you say something to me and I feel some type of way or offended, you don't get to tell me you should not be offended. That's not what I meant. That's not the point. The point is, I'm sharing with you, right? So we can heal. But at the same time, if I do something to you and you don't tell me, you just cheated me of an opportunity to also connect as human beings. Is that resonating with anyone or my people? Anyone? No? Yeah. A couple of hand nods.
Yep.
I'll keep moving.
Yep.
These are 5 constructs, right? The question we need to keep asking ourselves: how do we reimagine education via equity lens, starting with our own behaviors and actions? It's very easy to focus on things we cannot control. Very easy. So, I have a leader that told me in December, elementary level, the same leader that told me she's friends with black folk, Some of her best friends are black, so she's immersed in equity. She doesn't need help from the district on equity or SEL. So I followed up with her, and she said, yeah, no worries. I can talk to anyone. I'm friends with my supervisors and board members. Right? And guess what? Folk know about it. And not that I'm asking for her to be fired, because if we do that, we're just as bad. We're perpetuating inequities as well. But I am asking there has to be some healing, because otherwise the 70% BIPOC student population in her building is in trouble, as evidenced by the fact that teacher perception of black kids is 30 points below the average for the school. Right? So why do I bring that up? I cannot control that. I cannot. It eats me alive every day because I feel for the kids, including the white kids, because when we don't engage in equity, we actually harm white children as well. The common theme is a white boy from middle class, oh, they don't have problems from middle class. We make assumptions. We have single stories. We deprive that young person of having their identity affirmed in our halls, in classrooms, because we already told their story. That should not be it, because that individual has intersectional identities as well. I want to ask this as a group. If I can have a couple of people answer, I would appreciate it. How might your classroom serve as a place, or your school serve as a place where students' identities and their lived experiences are validated, honored, and respected, while also their urgent needs can be expressed and acknowledged? Keyword there, expressed and acknowledged. Doesn't say anything about solving, right? Anyone have any thoughts? Or just general, anything that resonating with you? I'm in Google land, you can tell me that, I'm okay with that too. Anyone? Yes.
I think a big part of that is listening to kids. And I think as an educator, sometimes it's hard to make time for that because you're constantly propelled forward by a curriculum map that's somewhat unattainable. And if we get so focused on what we have to accomplish, then we can gloss over the moments when kids are trying to share their stories with us and make them feel invalidated. And then I think also with their urgent needs, a lot of kids, especially teenagers whose brains are overly hormonal, needs to be reminded of how you express a need, and that coming into a room and throwing your backpack on the floor maybe isn't a productive way of expressing your need, but saying, I need to take a walk to the drinking fountain, or I need to talk to my favorite safe person, is a productive way of expressing your need. Because I think we see a lot of behavior that's kids trying to express a need in a way that's not expressing anything but kind of a teenage temper tantrum. So.
Counterproductive expression. Yeah.
Okay. In my class, I teach interesting classes for other people. But my students actually help decorate my room. So they work on creating posters, they work on helping to make it their classroom, their environment. And we also have a board in the room called Share Your Voice, where students can come in and they can write anything on the board that they want, any messages that they want to share. And it doesn't get erased until the end of the semester, so the kids come in and they add to it as the semester goes, and it's really cool to see grow.
Can I steal that? I think that's a very powerful tool, right? And then also listening to kids, but also listening to yourself, right? Listening to yourself. Anyone else? Yes.
I make sure I speak with every single one of my students individually in every single class period to greet them, to make sure that they are okay, to see what's going on and checking in. So I walk around the room constantly. I check in with each one of them. I know them now well enough when I can tell something is off to say, you know, some days we have off days and we feel a little bit off or a little bit weird. Is that what's going on? Because I see this and this is unusual. So being able to recognize that, I think has been very helpful. Because I have students come in now that say, I'm gonna drop my stuff off, but I need to go to the drinking fountain, I need to go for a walk. Or today has been a horrible day, can you give me 15 minutes? And all of those things, like and this week has been one of those weeks, I don't know about your all's classroom, but today, it's like, wow, I had like 6 people say, I need 5 minutes. I'm like, okay, take your 5 minutes. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
I really get lost in this keynote that I heard from Christopher Endon after I heard your teaching, where he like tried to explain how this like pre-service teacher he's working with was just like a robot teacher, like just was this blank slate thing in front of kids, and they weren't responding. And the phrase he used was ratchetemic academic spaces, and that rattles around in my head a lot. But I like really connect with that story because it made me realize how much of myself I was leaving at home. And clearly I wasn't going to be able to connect with another human being if I was leaving my humanity somewhere else. And that has like really like transformed me as an educator. And made a lot better kids.
Yep. Thank you. So I own 2 acknowledgments here. Number one, it's all of you in your classrooms, one way or another, you are practicing transformative SEL. That's the truth, right? But now the challenge is how do we as a system so that we can meet the needs of the kids? It's a challenge. You're all facing some of the biggest challenges in education, especially with the pandemic and so forth. That's a fact. So I want to say thank you for what you do, right? And that it's now lost on me that you already do it, right? So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how often and consistently and how can we support you. The second thing too is, I like to think of it as, so I taught lead 1 year at Drake. And the guy who took me there, Dr. Westbrook, he said, look, the question is this. These students have taken a lot of classes in their lives, in high school and also in college. The question is not what are they going to learn in your class. The question is, your class is a pit stop of many other pit stops. What do you want them to take away? If nothing else, if you can boil it down, what do you want them to take away? Right? And that changed, that was a paradigm shift for me, right? Because the classes, they're not end all be all, they're one stop. But in that moment, if nothing else, what do we want that young person to walk away with? Our humanity is one way. I had a professor in college, the hardest class I had was logic. He had like doctoral students and everything at Penn. And the philosophy professor used to sing instructions. Like I'm talking about like barely out loud. And he was an okay singer, right? But he didn't care what anyone thought. But he was also one of those, we did homework every week where 4 questions, he doesn't care how you get the answer, but if you get one thing, a comma or something off, it's wrong. And one of the last, towards the end of the semester, out of 66 submissions, 55 got donuts. I was one of those who got donuts, right? The 11, we try to hunt them down, right? They were just making us look bad. But the point of that is, you say, look, life is a law of averages, right? It's not a matter of you're going to strike out. You are going to strike out. But it's, as a human being, does that take so much away from you that you don't recognize yourself? Right, so keep that in mind. Okay, almost to the end here. So, adult SEL, there's 3 domains, right? The learn, collaborate, and also model that we're asking folks, especially with transformative SEL. That learn piece, cultivate their own social and emotional and cultural competence, collaborate with one another, not only with teachers, but also students, right? And with yourself. And then model, builds trusted relationships to maintain a strong community in your classroom and outside your classroom. So what I ask of you is, if you could talk to your partner real quick, next to you, real quick, what is one thing among these, when you talk about the categories, what is one thing that gives you life? So learning, is there something that when you do it, it gives you life? Or modeling, what is it that gives you life? Or when it comes to collaboration, right? So just wrap with your neighbors real quick, please.
But that's for me, it's even formal learning. Like, I love it. It's kind of stuff I like. I kind of make myself better. I need to work on the other team. I like collaborate, I can do better. I can do better at modeling, but learning is what I'm really excited about. Sharing my knowledge.
I'm always on board. As soon as I get my kids to bed, I start my reading that I'm doing. I'm always working on something, you know, or something in this budget. So today, during my planning block, my learning was, how do I do one fire where I've got greenware with blades on? How do I fire that so it's easy? So that's what I'm working on right now. At home, I've got a daughter that's just turned 17. She's got 40 college credits right now. But until they went off the rails.
All right.
3 weeks of Lutheran.
I can have y'all back. I know you're not finished. But I also want to honor my time. So, in closing, I would like to invite anyone that has anything they feel inspired to share. Something you're wrestling with, or something perhaps like it's an epiphany, or somebody saying, or something for the larger group. One person? You're not making me beg.
It's my job to do that, so I think I will. But like, I want to talk about the Flex Lab real quick. Can you guys talk about the planting that you did? Can someone do that in like 30 seconds?
We wanted something that was completely non-academic to do some community builder. So we got a bunch of seeds in pots and went through the whole process with kids and are trying to get them to care for watching what they grow. And I would say the kids that care the most are the kids that I have biased and I talk with care the least. Kind of every day, really hoping to see some stupid little seed poking out of dirt. It's a fun thing every day to watch.
When Dow said you're all doing transformative SEL, I thought of that right away. And Jocelyn, I thought of your class. Can you explain in 20 seconds what they did?
We were learning about the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and that led us to creating a Universal Declaration of Student Rights for North High School. Some of them were outrageous and unattainable, but there were a lot of really good ones. It was nice to hear what was actually on student mind.
One of the themes was that mental health supports for young people was one of the things that her students asked for. And it was nice to see that. It was nice to see that. That's what they want.
Yeah. And also naps on long days.
Wow. So selfishly, can I ask that if you're doing those cool things, please share with me, right? Because part of it is like sharing the best lessons with everyone else. And I may have you also share with other schools, right? Some of the things you're doing. And then we have a summit. What I'm trying to do is bring district leaders in so that they listen to some of the people on boots on ground that are doing amazing things. Because it's not connected with the words. So they need to see how it's actually transforming and people are doing the work despite the conditions. So if you have anything, please share those with me. I would really appreciate that. In closing, team, I want to say thank you. And I'll also be remiss if I did not also challenge each of us, right? How do we, when you think about somebody that inspires you in your life, right? It could be anyone. What goes into the soul craft of that individual? What goes into the soul craft of that individual? What is it about them that makes them a great human being or a good human being? And why I'm saying that, you are that person to somebody. You are that person to somebody, right? You're their inspiration. Somebody out there, you are their inspiration. You're that human model for them. So how can you recognize that greatness, that humanity in you, and let it shine every day, right? Because you're called to be you, be great, and be human. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for your time this afternoon.
Donuts tomorrow in the counseling office. Kelsey Howard. Thanks, sir.